Hello learners, welcome to today's session. Today we will be talking about environmental and occupational hazards. Lot of hazards are there in the environment and also related to our workplace. They pose danger to our health. So let us see what are these environmental and occupational hazards. Learners, let us understand the difference between hazard and risk, the two terms which we used most commonly together. So hazard has a potential to cause harm. Any pollutant, any external agency which can cause us harm is an hazard. But what is risk? Risk is the probability that what are the chances of getting exposure to that hazard. So risk may be high, risk may be low. How far will we be affected by these hazards? That is known as the risk. For example, people who live in the mountainous regions, they have a risk of getting affected by the landslides. So landslide is an hazard, but the people who live in the mountainous regions, they are at a risk. So I hope that these two terms are clear to you. Let us begin with environmental hazards. What are hazards which are caused due to environment? So we can say that environmental hazards are those hazards which are caused because of natural or anthropogenic changes in the environmental conditions and settings. Changes in temperature, changes in precipitation because of winds, because of changes taking place in the atmospheric conditions. So they are known as the environmental hazards. Environmental hazards are dangerous. They affect the survival, they affect the quality of living, they affect the livelihoods of the people if we talk in terms of social context. So environmental hazards have a lot of influence on our day-to-day life. But why do they occur? They occur naturally. Volcanoes occur naturally. But there are certain hazards which are aggravated because of human actions, because of our interference in the natural ecosystems. So floods may be natural, but in today's times they are more of anthropogenic in nature. They are because of the human influences in the natural settings. So in a nutshell, we can say that environmental hazards are those hazards which are caused because of changes in the environment. And these changes in the environment can occur because of the natural forces or because of the anthropogenic disturbances. We divide the environmental hazards into biological, physical and chemical factors. This is a broad categorization of dividing the hazards on the basis of their characteristics. What are physical hazards? Physical hazards are those physical agents, you can say. For example, fires taking place in the forest. It is a physical hazard, physical environmental hazard to the people who live in the vicinity of the forest. Similarly, heat waves which occur during summer months, they are the physical hazards. So physical hazards are termed under those conditions or hazards which threaten our physical safety. Fire, explosive materials, even noise, you can say, radiations, spills taking place. These are some of the examples of the physical hazards. Then comes the chemical hazards. Chemical hazards means when a person is exposed to certain chemical beyond a certain you can say concentration level. So that is the chemical hazards, and in today's times we find ourselves trapped under different chemicals. So these chemicals may be gases, they may be solids or they may be liquids. And when a person is exposed to chemicals of varying types, he may be facing acute or the chronic effect because of the exposure to these chemical substances. Some of these chemicals are very hazardous, they may be toxic and may lead to some serious diseases in human beings. And in today's times, because of rising environmental pollution, we find that there are a lot of chemicals outside. There are a lot of chemicals in the environment being dumped because of industries, because of thermal power plants, and because of so many human activities. Even agriculture is not spared by the interference of these chemicals. Then there are biological hazards also. That means they are the hazards which are caused due to living organisms. It may be bacteria, it may be flies, it may be viruses. So they are potentially harmful to our health. There are pathogenic bacteria, they may cause small, you can say, illnesses of the shorter intensity, but they may lead to the spread of the epidemics, which we have already witnessed in the recent times. So they are the toxins, they are toxins which are produced by the living organisms. So most of the diseases which are caused in human beings are the result of the exposure of ourselves with the biological hazards. They may be vector-borne diseases, they may be mosquito-borne diseases, they may be food-borne diseases, and these are all as a result of the biological hazards that we face in day-to-day times. But then today there are a lot of psychological hazards also. It may be stress, depression, hysteria, people living in the humid environment, people living in closed spaces without any sunlight, without any ventilation, and there is a direct correlation between the climate of a particular place and the temperament of the person. So you find lot of differences in the physical as well as the psychological factors of the people who live in the hilly areas or in the beaches, you can see, or near to the forest or in the desert like arid conditions. There is a lot of difference in their way of living, way of livelihoods, and it also affects their temperament. So there are psychological hazards also in today's times because of urbanization, because of people living in so many unhealthy conditions. The rise of psychological hazards is on the rise. It affects the mental health of the people. So we may not be physically ill, but because of the environmental conditions outside, we may be in a position that psychologically we are suffering from some kind of mental disorders or some kind of mental health issues. Then sociological hazards are also very common because the culture, the traditions, the customs of the people, in a certain kind of an environment, it affects the whole socio-economic conditions of the people who are living in those areas. So imagine the people who live near the landfill site. They are exposed to not only the chemicals and the polluted air, but they also suffer from the sociological hazard because it stigmatizes the people who live near these areas. So increase in violence, increase in crime. Even if in the urban areas you can see that rise in the obesity, this is all because of the sociological hazards, because we in a society as we live, so there are a lot of pressures which make us use or exploit the resources or lead a lifestyle which may be a kind of a problem or a serious health issue in the near future. So these are some of the common physical, chemical, biological, psychological and sociological environmental hazards to which a person is exposed to. So if we see that how we can divide these environmental hazards on the basis of the causes, what causes them? So on that basis there are certain land related hazards, for example landslides, earthquakes. These are caused because of the changes in the land. Then there are water related hazards, for example floods, drought, tsunamis. They are because of the changes in the water conditions or because of the disturbances in the water bodies. There are atmosphere related hazards which is very common. Thunderstorm, lightning, it affects the people. It affects the people in a short term as well as the long term consequences are seen. It gives, it leads to loss of life, property, spread of diseases further, economic insecurity and so on. And one of the important cause of environmental hazard in the urban areas is infrastructure related. The type of the congestion we see in our roads, whenever there is a kind of a collapse of dams, bridges, etc. taking place, then there are maybe certain environmental hazards may occur because of the accidents, just like the example of Bhopal gas tragedy, which led to the release of the harmful gas which affected the lives of the people through the generations. So whenever we find that there is a chemical spill, chemical accident taking place in any factory, release of harmful substances in the form of effluent or in the form of emissions, it is also a kind of an environmental hazard which brings a, you can say, which affects the health of the people because of the environmental conditions. Learners, now let us talk about occupational hazards. Occupation means our place, a place of, you can say, where we work, that is our workplace, and how occupation and health are related, because you must know that around 1/3 of our life is being spent at our workplace. So the type of workplace we are having, it also has a direct influence on our health and well-being. Around 45% of the world population and 58% of the population over 10 years of age belong to the workforce. So this workforce, wherever they are working, the type of the setting of the workplace, it affects their health. It may lead to the cause of several types of diseases. So occupational health is something which is very important. It is an important strategy not only to improve or to take care of the health of the workers, of the employees, but also to see that they are able to contribute, you can say, positively, and it can also be a kind of an help to improve their productivity at the workplace. It should also lead to motivation, job satisfaction, and also thereby affecting the overall quality of the life of the individuals and the society at large. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that is OSHA, it's a government organization which takes care of the health of the workers to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, and it has listed 6 main types of occupational hazards. Number 1 comes the safety, and this category includes any condition, substance or object which can injure a worker. Like if you are working, if a factory person is working from the great height, there may be spills on the floors, there may be usage of machinery which can cause harm, which can cause cuts, which can cause burns, there may be steep stairs. So we have to check that what kind of electric wiring is there at such places. So number 1 category, you have to look at the safety of the workers, how the workers are working, whether the place where they are working is safe or not. Then chemicals, how a worker is exposed to different chemicals and toxins in different workplaces. For example, environmental smoke, cleaning products, acids, pesticides, the release of different gases. Most of the people who work in the factories are exposed to these chemicals throughout their lives. So if they are working for 20-25 years in a factory and exposing themselves to these chemicals, there is a serious concern. There are biological hazards, people who work in the horticulture sector, farmers, gardeners, they are also, in touch with these biological organisms. Most of the times we find that different types of bites taking place, insect bites taking place, and there is no safety mechanism. Likewise, there are physical hazards, that what kind of your work demands too much of standing, your work demands too much of climbing of stairs, your work demands too much of use of your fingers, so that may result into the physical hazards. Likewise, ergonomic hazards, that how our body is strained over a period of time. So we may be repeatedly sitting. In today's times we find that there is a lot of work which involves sitting in front of the computers. or standing in awkward positions. You can see different when you look around and you see people doing the monotonous jobs. You find that it is also a kind of an hazard which needs serious interventions in order to take care of the health and safety of the workers. And organizational hazards, the type of organization, the type of culture, the type of hierarchy it is there, whether job satisfaction is there or not, whether there is so much of, whether or not if any kind of exploitation persists, similarly harassment, discrimination. Now, these are very common at different places, and this is also one of the important occupational hazard. So, it results into occupational diseases. There are diseases which are contracted primarily because of an exposure to risk factors. For example, coal miners are exposed to coal dust. Similarly, farmers are exposed to different kinds of allergens of various kinds. So, it results into occupational diseases. And occupational asthma is very common, which happens because of the exposure of certain chemicals and gases to the person who is involved at such work at the workplace. So, you find a lot of difference between the occupational diseases in the rural sector and in the urban sector. If you look at the rural sector, agriculture exposes the workers to various occupational risks. And according to International Labour Organization, 50% of the occupational fatalities occur in the world because of direct or indirect factors related to agriculture. So, common diseases in this sector are musculoskeletal apparatus, respiratory, nervous system, also the skin is affected. Similarly, silicosis, musculoskeletal injuries, coal workers, pneumoconiosis, chronic obstructive lung diseases, asbestosis, biocinosis. There are a lot of diseases which occur in the rural areas, and the workers are not even aware that they are exposed to these harmful chemicals and toxins during their work time. In the urban sector, you find that mostly ergonomic hazards are more common here. Respiratory, nervous systems, eye disorders, heart issues, lifestyle based diseases, noise induced hearing loss is occurring, blood pressure, mental health issues. These are very common diseases in the urban sector. So, when we divide the occupational diseases, it may be on the basis of agriculture and the elite sector like dairy, horticulture, poultry, different kind of diseases occurring at those sectors. Industrial sector is one which includes in itself even mining and other type of industrial work which is being carried out without any safety mechanism, without any safety procedures being followed. Hospital and health sector is one of the important segment of the occupational diseases, where the people who are working are exposed to different chemicals, different biological hazards also. Likewise, corporate and office hazards are very common, and such type of service sector, as we are growing, such type of diseases are more likely to occur in the near future. So, these are just the examples of agriculture and elite sector. Biocinosis is inhalation of cotton fiber, over long periods of time. Bagasosis is occupational disease of the lung because of the inhalation of the sugarcane dust. Then in the industrial sector, musculoskeletal ailments occur, dermatosis, eczema, acne, asbestosis is occurring because of fibrous materials being inhaled. Then mining and construction related hazards, again we have physical, chemical, biological hazards, and also in the corporate. So, there is a National Institute of Occupational Health. It works for improving the management of occupational health risk in India. It is an occupational health research institute which is funded by the Government of India, and it is responsible for helping the national policy makers to frame suitable means and effective policies for taking care of the health of the employees and eliminating and reducing cases of serious work related health and safety issues. But there are challenges to mitigate the environmental and the occupational hazards, because most of the times the people are not aware that they are exposed to. Proper implementation of the legislation is one of the important factors which needs interference, and there is lack of funding and spending on public health, which is also one of the main factor because of which the environmental and occupational hazards are rising year by year. So we can conclude that environmental hazards may be physical, chemical, biological or psychological, and occupational hazards refers to the hazards by which a worker is exposed at his or her workplace. And in today's times, taking care of the environmental hazards and occupational health and safety must be the top priority to ensure health and well-being of the employees. Thank you so much.